Chapter 3, Organizational Climate and Culture. We're going to talk a little bit about the difference between climate and culture. And we'll start off just talking a little bit about there's lots and lots of changes in healthcare that you guys will come and see through the years of your professional practice. And you're also seeing probably lots of these kind of changes. You think about how the economics of our country and many other countries for that matter around the pandemic caused drastic changes in healthcare, and thus huge issues in care of a patient population in a pandemic has created huge economic problems in our world. So we have to be prepared that the work environments that we're in, the cultures of organizations, the climates that people perceive in a work setting can all be influenced by these huge changes in healthcare. Social things, unrest, social positive things can happen that do positive things in healthcare, but social injustice can often be the impetus for changing something in healthcare to support a marginalized society or to help folks that are not really getting fair access to care and lots of other things, or if not even just fair access, equal treatment when they are provided care. And then we know finance is a huge thing in our country. We're going to have a whole entire module of 3 weeks to talk about quality and financial realm of healthcare. So you guys will get a much broader perspective when we get to that segment in Module 3. These are just some definitions in your textbook. You're welcome to read through these, but in general, if you think about, people have trouble trying to remember what's the difference between culture and climate, and some people just use those interchangeably. But in reality, a culture are actual shared beliefs and values of almost everybody in the organization. And those endure for a long period of time. They're very, very hard to change once those beliefs and values are very entrenched. Sometimes those beliefs and values are all positive. Sometimes they're positive and negative. Sometimes they're not so positive and more negative. And so trying to recognize what those are as you embark on a career in an organization. And then you have healthcare agencies that may have these shared beliefs in everything on a piece of paper, okay? And they're doing a great job. They have good outcomes and a lot of different things. But you can go and ask a handful of people on a particular unit or department or something within that organization, and their perceptions about that work are might be very different than what the typical shared beliefs and values are. So the main thing to remember is climate is about an individual's perception, whereas culture is a much broader definition and deals with shared beliefs of multiple people, whereas climate is the perception of an individual, maybe not all about the whole organization, but more about particular work unit or environment. And people who are trying to figure out, what's going on with the climate, they're trying to assess what are different individuals believing. A lot of what they make their decision about a climate on is, what is the decision making in this unit that we're in? What kind of leadership do we have? Is this somebody who really walks the walk, or they tell us to do something but they don't do it? Is the supervisor supportive? Does the peers in your work group get along? Is there cohesion? Do you have some autonomy, or are you really controlled in your work setting? Is there ongoing conflict or work pressure? Do you get rewards when you do things well? Are you made to feel, important? And or is there a lot of risk in your area of work? So any of those kind of things can kind of help sort out, like, what is it that people make a decision on their assessment of the climate. Those are the things that go into what an individual may judge their work area based on. There is often a culture climate link. So what you're trying to figure out, but it's not always exact. So how do these shared values and beliefs get perceived by individuals that work in the setting? So it's kind of like, well, how does, we have all these shared beliefs and values, but, I'm one person and I don't necessarily value those things. I'm not sure I really think that they're upholding those things. It's really an individual judges the climate. So, that's just an important nuance of that to think about. That you can have an organization that really fosters this certain kind of thing, but you may have individuals who don't see it that way. Okay? So when they're doing research to determine what's the culture and what's the perceived climate, they may have everything in place for a wonderful culture, and maybe still getting great outcomes and lots of things. But when you interview employees on satisfaction around those assessment things that we just mentioned, you might get totally different kinds of answers. Like, some people think it's great, some people don't agree about those things at all. So you can't assume that. You have to really gather information more to determine how close is the culture and that perceived climate in a set smaller unit. Really, what do those have in common, or are they totally opposite of each other? You also see some information that talks about nurse practice environment, and this is really focusing on a work group having its own climate or its own perception of what it feels like to work within a geographical area. So while climate is more of an individual perception, nurse practice environment is more like, what does the group of nurses perceive about what it's like to work in this particular environment? These are some good tips to kind of think about when you're thinking about how hard it is to change culture. That leaders really, if they're going to do a great job, and that might not just be a named nurse manager, you yourself will be a leader before you know it in doing things in your area to kind of change a culture if there's something about it that's not exactly the way you want it to be. So people really have to use more of a stepwise process if they're really going to affect culture, because it's so entrenched. So you have to identify the desired change, really understand what all's involved in that change. You have to assess the current status of the group. Where's the group's head at? And a group is made up of individuals. So sometimes that really, ideally, as we've said, climate is a part of what builds the culture. But if individuals don't all have the same thoughts about what's going on, you may have a lot of people that, you're having a group meeting and everybody's kind of like, yeah. But if you talk to individuals, you may find out some totally different answers, because one-on-one, they may share with you some different things about their beliefs about the change that you're planning on trying to implement. Leaders are always going to try to create a shared need for this change. and really try to garner group commitment to the change. And that is about 50% of the job right there, is really selling people on why this will benefit them or why it absolutely has to be done. And because because my boss told me we had to, is not going to be developing a shared need or group commitment, as you can imagine. So there has to be a way to explain whatever this change that's necessary is that really invites and excites people to participate in it and makes them really want to move towards it. And that's not always easy. That's one of the hardest things of changing the culture, is getting that group commitment. And again, appropriate communication skills, really a lot of personal contact, because you don't want to just talk to one person or two. You really want to talk to everybody individually if you can. Have open discussion, and if you have a big group together, you don't just talk to the ones that talk. You specifically draw out, facilitate, and kind of force the people who are not talking to give an opinion. And so you have to be a skilled facilitator to be able to do that well. You want to identify shared values and a mission so that the group knows where we're going. So you want to outline how this change fits in with what you all already value, why it would lead you along the right track in terms of meeting the mission that you're all after. And then as a team, you want to develop strategies. How can we do this the best? You don't just go with your thoughts on it. You really engage your workers in getting their ideas about the best strategies, and then kind of as a team, develop an action plan for change. And of course, you get the plan made, then you have to implement it. And then you really have to evaluate it. And I don't mean just like once or twice or whatever. You have to really keep knowing that change comes very slowly and people come along very slowly. So they may all do whatever the change is the first week or two, and you go back a month later and no one's doing it. Okay? So you can't just think like on the front end, the honeymoon phase, it's all going great, because what you find is the change doesn't stick. So it's important, I would say, implement, plan, and evaluate, and evaluate, and evaluate, because it takes that level of commitment to monitoring the change afterwards to ensure it really does, and maybe creating some additional action plans if needed to make the change stick. There's several things in your this chapter that kind of deals with a focus on a culture of quality, and I'm just going to talk about some of these. You've probably heard about these in some other coursework so far also. Some hospitals have a magnet recognition program where they're accredited by and have what's called magnet status, and they have to do a ton of different structural ways they engage nurses in, teams and councils and things to really have them optimize care, have more autonomy, have better decision making, actually have their voices heard, and not just once or twice, but like a whole system of how councils and meetings are set up so that this is an ongoing process for nurse engagement in making the best nursing practice environments. And that's why that magnet status hospitals often attract and retain most of their nurses better than non-magnet status hospitals. So you may see that when you're looking at different hospitals that you're interested in work, do they have magnet status? So it's something to really consider, because they really have adopted some things to make quality outcomes, excellent practice environments for nurses and all that, kind of as a normal way of being in their hospitals. It's considered a designation of excellence. It's considered the gold standard from a nursing perspective of a place you'd want to work. They are supposed to exude a culture that really supports nurse autonomy, good communication, and providing nurses the resources they need to do the work that they do. And it really becomes an environment where excellence is the norm. Like you might hire somebody into a magnet status hospital, and if they don't have that as their beliefs and values, like they believe in cutting corners, they've worked somewhere else for years, and that's how they're used to doing it, they're going to have a really difficult time often coming into a setting that has this kind of structure and this kind of norm. And on the flip side of that, if you're one of the workers that are in the hospital as a nurse and you are seeing people that get hired that don't exude what you think is excellence in practice, you're going to have a lot of peer pressure towards those people to get on it, because that's the norm. And if you're not going to be part of the norm, you're not going to tear down what we've built up. We're not going to drop our standards and allow you to change our level of excellence. So it kind of keeps, if you ever get it in place and keep it going, it really kind of breeds this kind of culture in the whole organization and climate in individual nursing units that is very perceivable all the time. People also try to strive to have professional practice environments. These are either, very overt, and you can tell by the way they've got things organized that they have continuous learning. That's the expectation for all their nursing staff. They have, professional nursing development personnel that are assigned to every area and unit. So they're constantly working on not just your continuing ed, but like how many more people can get certified in a specialty they're interested in, and how many people are going back to school, and just different things to kind of keep building more and more of your development from the beginning and as you grow in the organization. And there's also in professional practice environment this shared perception of learning. The main reason you're doing on this learning is to really enhance your practice ongoingly, keep quality very high, and have excellent patient outcomes. So you'd see those kinds of focus in an area that has what they call a professional practice model or professional practice environment. I'll briefly just mention, you may have seen these before, but I want you to really think about how old these are. The Institute of Medicine in 2000 and 2001 had two major publications where first they really addressed the huge issue of how can we reduce medical errors, and then out of that was born what you all see today, like the national patient safety goals that have been established year after year, and through the Joint Commission. And so there's just this agenda like we're going to really eliminate errors altogether. Well, we know that although the system is so much safer than it used to be by all these initiatives that were put in place, there's still human error. So you still have to, and also there's a huge focus, you see to error as human, meaning that humans can make mistakes. So instead of focusing on individual performance as much, what systems do healthcare agencies need to have in place that help prevent someone from making an error? So that was the focus of that. Now it's been 23 years. You see lots of these things in place when you go to a hospital today that wasn't there 23 years ago. But we're continuing to try to still work on those systems to make them safer and safer. The Crossing the Quality Chasm that came out in 2001 also really put home the subject of who's in charge of the quality. It used to be physicians were making all the decisions, or a nurse was very authoritarian, like you'll take your bath at 10 because that's when I can come around and give it. But with this publication, the focus really was supposed to go from what a provider, a physician, or a nurse who wanted things a certain way to move towards the patient should be the center of care and they should be making decisions, as well as family participation, with the treatment team on treatment decisions. So it's more this level of not, allowing more patient autonomy, and that by doing so, there would be less errors and higher quality of care and a higher perceived quality of care because of having some say-so in what is happening with them. Of course, there's been a huge focus, like I said, on patient safety, the culture and climate. These are some of the tenets that you typically would see nurse leaders have. They're good leaders, they're involved, the nursing staff are very involved in these things. There's a blameless culture, what they call a just culture, meaning that people are free to report errors and things that might come up, so that we can study that and figure out how best to improve and make it safer. Lots of communication in different ways or best ways to communicate. Focus on teamwork and doing things to keep things safe. Everybody really having a commitment to safety, period. Like, I'm going to be safe, you're going to be safe, we're going to all be safe. And really getting at teaching people that errors usually are not so much human error, in the sense that it's usually a process and a place in how we've set up something that an opportunity for error could be eliminated if we just redesigned the process. And that way no one would be having the error. So those are some of the tenets that have come out of that. You also have seen a huge focus on healthy work environments, and these were some basic things that were injury related mostly, but not only for safe in that way, but like even now you hear healthy work environments in terms of having places where workers can walk outside in nature, and so it's grown even beyond the safe from not having errors, but safe and healthy for them as an individual as well. Again, I mentioned just culture. We'll talk more about that when we talk a little bit about some of our quality problems that we're going to experience this semester in this course. But again, moving away from punitive and reactive kind of culture to we're going to be fair and just when things occur. And really trying to find a middle ground between patient safety and like what is and having this culture of some kind of way we can constantly keep reducing error. These are some of the implications for leaders and managers. Again, the leader's got to have a convincing vision that inspires their team. You are going to have caring values need to be reflective in how the organization treats its staff too. It's not enough to just be caring, towards the patient, the family, and those. They have to believe that they really are being cared about themselves. And remember that the challenging of nursing leadership belongs to every nurse, not just managers and administrators. And you're going to be doing leader type activities even when you start to work. So you need to be really focused on how you can be part of this as well. These are some of the key things that really leaders need to be paying strong attention to. Are they recruiting the right people? Are they retaining people? How do they welcome new people and really get them? Not just oriented, but how do you get them socially engaged into the group? Are they taking on tasks to recognize and really reward accomplishments of their people? Are they facilitating change when it's needed? And are they promoting a just culture in this professional practice environment that we talked about? Again, here's some of the typical trends that are out in the literature that are key things that you want to pay attention to, and issues that can, influence or impact how well we do some of this organizational culture and climate work. Of course, we know that, generational diversity, we see a lot of focus on diversity of people from ethnic and economic backgrounds and all these kinds of things, and genders and all that. But even from a generational workforce, many of you will be coming into a workforce where you're the youngest people, and there's, your best buddy or your work buddy is 55 years old. How do you connect with that? How do we help workers help each other and blend when they're come from so varied generational backgrounds? I would encourage you guys that you need to kind of develop a strategy for investigating organizations that you're thinking about going to work in. Like, what can you determine about the climate of a unit and department or a healthcare setting? How can you gauge inner organizational climate from the interview process? What kinds of questions are you going in ready to ask? What kind of staff interactions do you observe? It's really a good idea to request, if it's not offered, a unit tour of the units you're considering. You're going to see and hear lots of things as you do that unit tour that really give you a good idea about what is it like. You might even ask, could I talk to one of the other nurses here and find out a little bit about from what they like about being in this area or this unit. And then networking and word of mouth, that you may figure out somebody that that works at that organization, and connect with them so that you can find out more and more about what's the good things that they perceive. And again, remember, that is their individual climate as they see it. It may not really be the whole organizational culture. So that's why it's good to talk to more than one person if you can, see more if you go, and kind of really find out as much as you can. Once you begin working, there's a lot of things that you see, like what's really the visible climate. How are policies enacted? Are they being followed? Does everybody get treated the same? Are policies upheld? Is the manager very lax? What are the unit norms? Sometimes you have like this culture that's like on the website, mission, vision, values, whatever, but the unit norms are very different than that culture sometimes in some units. And so it's very important to kind of get that sense a little bit before starting a job, or as you begin a job, really kind of think about what is your perception of this climate. What is the dress code and appearance of people? Do they look haggard? Do they look like they've, or do they look professional? Do they look like people that are happy? Are they smiling? Are they seemingly get along down the hall? Do you visibly see and hear positive communication and teamwork, or are you seeing bad things that are going on? And the ability to translate the vision, the mission, and the goals of the organization into these unit level values of performance is really where you see, how is these things really linked into clinical practice? And if a leader can really get that going and get that done well, then you're going to come in and it's like, wow, this is the best place to work of all. So just to be aware that it's not just all something on paper. A leader is really trying to, if they're doing it well and they're a good leader, they're really going to try to make those things come true, to really make the unit and the workplace turn into a place that really has value and worth, and people feel like they enjoy their work, and even on hard days they support each other and things are good and they want to stay there. So those are the kinds of things that you're really looking for. Again, watch what you see. What do you observe? Do people wash their hands? Do they knock on a door when they go in a room? Do they holler at somebody down the hall in an unprofessional way? Are two people over to the side gossiping about somebody else? I mean, there's just so many things that when you just literally be quiet and walk through an area, you will see a lot of things that give you some cues and clues. So take the opportunity to do that. And as you engage in whatever new work environment that you choose to go into, pay attention to those kinds of things. And what is your behavior like? Are you really buying into the vision? Are you part of that? Are you incorporating? Are you acculturating to that climate if it's a good one? Are you doing your part to really uphold those same roles and responsibilities that nurses should have for that kind of culture? So I'll leave you with that to kind of ponder, and we'll talk about this some more later on.